Mrityormam amrita kamaya ahavir maedhi rudra yate dakshinam mukham te namaham pa nityam. Om, lead us from the unreal to the real. Lead us from darkness unto light. Lead us from death to immortality. Reach us through and through ourselves, and evermore protect us from ignorance by thy sweet, compassionate face. So my subject this morning is the puzzle of personal identity. Personal identity means self-identity. We have to begin by postulating, in order to make sense out of our everyday life, we have to begin by postulating a self, an ego, a subject of our thinking, feeling, willing, someone who initiates action and takes responsibility for the actions. We have to postulate that there is a core sense of self, a kind of an inner controller, a thread that runs through all of our self-conscious activity. Now, what do we mean by the self? Well, do we mean the Buddhist self? Do we mean the Humean self? Do we mean the existentialist self? The Kantian self? Do we mean the Freudian self? The Jungian self? The communitarian self? The narrative self? These are all discussions that are cutting edge discussions about the nature, about our true nature. And it all gets very confusing. And philosophers, considering all these terms and trying to balance one against the other, find themselves ending up wildly buzzing around like a fly in a bottle. So that's our subject here, is to look more carefully into our self-identity. We can begin here with an old Greek legend about the ship of Theseus. Now, Theseus was a hero of the Persian War. He was the hero who killed the Minotaur lived in the middle of the labyrinth. You know how he had to go in there and rescue the hostages, and he found his way out by following the thread of Ariadne. And Theseus, after the war, he began his return home to Athens in a ship rowed by 40 oarsmen. And he managed to do what no one had ever done before, and that is he managed to pass by and to resist the temptations of the bird creatures who lived on the island of Sirens. And for having done this, he was acknowledged by the gods and given the power to foretell the future. In any case, when he returned to Athens, he was celebrated as a hero, and after he died, his ship remained docked there as a kind of a historic destination. It was a historic site. And there it sat for years and years. And as it gradually, things deteriorated, the sails deteriorated and things needed to be replaced one by one. Years passed, 100 years passed, 200 years passed, 300 years passed. By this time, one by one, every plank, every mast, every part of that ship had to be so weather beaten and exposed to the elements, had to be replaced. And well, later this posed an interesting paradox for Greek philosophers like Heraclitus and Socrates and Plato, because they thought, how is it possible for something to be called and to be known as a ship, a single thing, to maintain its identity even though it's constantly changing? How do we find the unity in the diversity of things? And it's true that as we think about that ship, and there it is, docked at a pier. It's the same. There's only been one ship that's docked there. And it's always been called the ship of Theseus. And it's been, tour guides have shown tourists for hundreds of years, have pointed out this is the ship. And everyone has visited this historic site. And yet, Theseus never walked on that deck. And that is the ship that remains. He was never tied to that mast and resisted the temptations of the sirens. So in what sense was it the same ship? Well, the idea of philosophers is that we are like the ship. We're constantly changing. All of the biologists tell us that all of the cells of our bodies, maybe in 18 months, that every single cell of the body deteriorates and dies and is replaced by another. And so there were a completely new combination of cells after that time. On the other hand, we can look at ourselves and we can think, yeah, but there is some continuity. The formal features of our person remain the same. I mean, we still have a head and two arms and legs. And after all, the cells, okay, although in particular cell is changed in a sense, and yet it's the same type. It's the same tissues have changed in the sense, but they've been renewed, but they're still the same kind. And our biometrics pretty much remain the same. That is your fingerprints, your voice print, and our body type. Certainly our statistics, the information about where you were born, that remains. That doesn't change. Your date of birth, your blood type, your DNA profile, all those remain the same. And so that's why some philosophers say that in fact the source of our identity is very reasonable for us to assume that although there's a process of evolution, that the idea of the body is the same as the source. It's from that we can construct a reasonable sense of ourself. And that is a bodily self. And we call ourselves, in the Upanishads, it's called the Anna Maya Atma, that is the self, made of food. So our physical self, our physical body, as the basis for it, we understand that we identify with the body. And so maybe that's the source of our identity. It's just the continuity of the body. We believe like the old who was it, the Muslim narrator, Nasruddin. He used to write, and he was a kind of the wise fool of that tradition. He was once, he went into a bank, and the bank teller asked him, well, can you identify yourself? And Nasruddin reached into his pocket and he pulled out a mirror, looked in the mirror, he said, yep, that's me. So he identified with his body. So like that, we identify with the Annamaya Kosha, one of the levels. You hear in the Vedanta teaches that we have 5 bodies. So it's reasonable to assume that Annamaya Kosha. And yet we know that we're more than just a physical body. Philosophers also, we talk about some puzzles. I don't know how these puzzles got in, but in philosophy of mind, that's the way they like to approach this subject. In any case, one of their puzzles is about the Star Trek transporter puzzle that we can just imagine that Captain Kirk or Captain Picard goes into the transporter room, and there they turn on the switches and the dials, and they push the buttons, and his physical body is dematerialized, it's completely disassembled, and is digitalized, and somehow it's beamed off into outer space. And lo and behold, Captain Picard materializes on the planet Mars, and he continues his adventures. And the question, you see, that such a question is it the same Picard? Is this the original man? Now see, for a materialist and for a physicalist, that's no problem. Of course, there's no problem. He's just beamed to Mars. Yeah, he's the same man. But for people like ourselves, we think of maybe, well, wait a minute. Maybe there's something left out. Isn't there something left out? And our intuition is, it seems like it'd be the whole psychology would be left out. I mean, the whole of the subtle, the whole subjective person. That is his thoughts, his feelings, his memories. None of those are all immaterial things. Those are things which are subjective, which you can't find in space. I mean, a scientist couldn't even locate those things, let alone be able to measure them and quantify them and digitalize them. So they could never be reduced to something which could just be transported in this manner. Take, for example, our memories. Now, philosophers often point out that one of the ways in which our self is constructed is that just by the continuity of our memories. That we can think back, and we love our memories. We're very fond of our journals, our diaries, scrapbooks, photographs, photo albums. Why? Because looking back, they remind us of ourselves. They remind us when we were there. We take up 100 different photos in an album, and really they just kind of tell our story. There it is in a graphic version. And so, well, maybe that's how our sense of self is constructed, just by putting all of these memories, the chain, like of cause and effect, one leads to another. And so we can reasonable to conclude that we are the memories. Of course, Patanjali, the Yoga Sutras, tells us, well, maybe that's not quite true, because memories, we understand as yoga psychology, arise like waves in the lake of the mind. and that they're there, and then they come and they go, and then when they subside, true, they're embedded in our psyche. Yes, we can recall them. But what really remains continuous is the mind. And the idea that we could maybe identify ourselves with the mind. That the mind is a substantial thing. It's made out of mind stuff. That is subtle matter. We believe, yoga psychology, we believe that there's three kinds of stuff. There's physical stuff, there's mental stuff, and then there is causal matter. We can call it matter, but matter, of course, not in the sense of materialist matter. And so the mind remains the continuity of the mind remains. So this is the mano maya atma. That's the word, the Sanskrit words for it. The annamaya atma, the bodily self, these 5 different selves. We're talking about the manomaya atma. That is our mental self. But we want to say, we're body. The classical idea, though, is we're body and we're looking into our self-identity. So we're trying to get an intuition of what is our self. And our natural, the classical idea about a person, what is a person, is that we are body, mind, and soul. That is, there are levels of description. Let's just say that we're talking about water. We're talking about ourself now. Let's say ourself is kind of like H2O. And H2O, if we describe it, we could describe it as a solid block of ice, or we could describe it as liquid water, or we could describe it as kind of an ethereal gaseous substance, vapor. All of those are different descriptions of H2O. Similarly, it is with ourself. We can think of ourselves as body, as mind, or as the soul. That is, as the embodied spirit. And now, today, maybe at one time, you're a newborn babe, and you just think of yourself as a body. You are a body self. We grow, mature. We become old. We're in the middle. Maybe we think that I'm a mind. I have a body, and maybe I have a soul. So that's kind of how we gauge our understanding of ourself. So let's look now into what do we mean by the soul. But the classical idea of the soul, Vedanta, the soul is just the reflection of yourself in the buddhi, that is, in the subtlest causal level of the psyche. That self-reflection, call it the reflected self. It's called the jivatma, the living self. Atman here means self. This is the living self, the embodied self. We call it the soul, the embodied self. And if we think of ourselves as body, our person, if we think of our person, if our person is baby body and mind, then we think of our soul as being our personhood. Our soul is a real substantial thing. It's grounded in subtle, what in Sankhya philosophy, Prakriti, is subtle, not called subtle, but a causal matter. We could call it Chidakasha. That is, that's Akasha in close proximity. There's 5 elements, right? As we go up in the scale of gradation of elements, earth, air, fire, earth, water, fire. air, ether. That's the akasha. The subtlest conception of a material thing or of an objective thing is our soul. Our soul is like our intelligence. The first manifestation in Sankhya cosmology, the first manifestation of Prakriti is intelligence. The ability, the possibility of making intelligible distinctions between anything. That's the pure, we could call it our intelligence. We could call it our spiritual intelligence. The soul is here we're trying to explain. What do we, because we don't use this word to refer to ourselves. It's kind of like a religious word. Ordinarily, we don't talk about my soul, myself. Soul is just like a person. If we say 100 souls were lost in the conflict, that's an old-fashioned way of saying 100 people, that is, body, mind, and spirit. But a soul is just your center. And if we were to say that your intellectual part of yourself, that is, if the soul is the deepest, subtlest, most invisible part of ourselves, our intellectual self, maybe we'd say, is in our head. We would say our soul is in our heart. And the soul is often associated with divinity. Why is that? That's because the soul is our self-consciousness. It's our reflected self. When we say it's our I consciousness. When we say I am, that's the voice of our reflected self. That's the voice of our soul. That's the voice of the Jivatma saying I am. It's ourself. We identify ourselves with consciousness. Self-consciousness is our soul. Consciousness is the natural metaphor for consciousness is of light. Light illumines darkness, just like awareness and knowledge illumines dark places. And so therefore the soul, that is consciousness, is often associated with divinity. Divinity just means the Greek, the Indo-European root div, that means deva, that means shining one, that means consciousness. And so as soon as we talk about consciousness, we're talking about a connection with divinity. The soul is that which we encounter ourselves. We could say we apperceive. Apperceive is the notion, that's an old Kantian word. Apperception means is somehow we experience our soul in deep sleep. When the mind is occluded, the body is forgotten, the world's forgotten, mind is occluded, their ego, everything is gone. The only thing that remains is kind of self-awareness, just awareness of nothingness. When we awake the next morning, we say, yes, I slept happily and I knew nothing. That which is evidence that, at least we existed at that time, abiding in our true nature, although we don't know we're not directly knowing our non-dual nature, but we are experiencing the absence of duality. And so that gives a kind of a happiness, a kind of a sense of peace. So this is our soul, the soul, the most invisible part of ourself. We call it the I am. It's the I amness. The I amness is eternal. It's never created, goes on forever until in the end it dissolves in the ocean of infinite consciousness like a salt doll in the ocean. So body, mind, our intuition, I'm body, mind. I'm using here the Sankhya analysis. So I'm favorite of Swami Vivekananda to help us to understand. This is the scaffolding that helps us to understand Vedanta. It's not Vedanta, but it's stepping stone to Vedanta. That I embody my personal self. I'm body, mind, and soul. Gross, subtle, causal. That's Prakriti. Now let's see what Vedanta says about ourself. See, the whole of Vedanta begins with an experience. And that is immediate, direct, superconscious experience of the Atman. That means of pure consciousness. That's the axiom from which Vedanta begins. From that is derived the whole hierarchy of analysis, philosophy, practice. Everything kind of follows as a consequence, as an inquiry into how is this possible. So we begin here with the self. That is not with our personal self, but with the impersonal, the absolute self. Now we're talking here about the Atman. The Atman is the absolute, impersonal, we could say the infinite, one only without a second, the infinite reality. It's the non-dual infinite reality. It is the source of our self-concept. It doesn't think, doesn't feel, doesn't see anything, it doesn't bodiless, nameless, formless, bodiless. In other words, it is the source of our identity. It is the Atman shines. The Atman is ourself, with a capital S. The Atman, according to Vedanta, shines. I'll give an analogy. The Atman shines through a prism, a Mahamaya, just like the sun shines through a prism. And we get divided up into colors. We get the body and the mind and the soul. And so there appears as a result of our embodiment. We perceive ourselves as body, mind, and souls because we see through a glass darkly, and we're the manifestation of the universal self. That is, we are a jivatma. The Sanskrit words, but they're helpful to us. One is the Atman, the other is the jivatman, the impersonal self with a capital S, and the personal self with a lowercase s. And maybe we could think of it as the Swami Vivekananda used to speak about, the higher self and the lower self. The higher self is the big me that the little me is worshiping. Let's think of the self. Let's think of the Atman then as the big me. However we conceive of that infinite being has become a finite being that is myself. In the presence of the big me, the little me wakes up. That is, in the presence of pure consciousness, the relative personal conscious mind wakes up. We become conscious, our intellect comes online, our senses come online, our mind becomes alert and active, begins to process the senses, our heart begins to beat, life comes into our body. All this is in the presence of the big me. The little me wakes up, becomes alive. And that life and that consciousness goes down through my mind and into my heart and down to the tip of my toes. a conscious life is there. And so the idea being that what is the source of our identity, our self-identity? The source of our self-identity lies in the Atman, that is in the impersonal, absolute, universal, one only without a second. That is the source of our being, our consciousness, our life, our value, and the unity of our being. Everything we see, we're pervaded by that sense of there being unified. They're unified things. It's not just a chaos it's not a chaos of electrons and atoms. It's things are separate, and everything is organized and integrated into one view of a scene of which I am the center. I'm the center of the consciousness. What's the source of that center is the Atman. That's the unity. All that's what comes down to us from on high, from the big me and the little me. And so we could say that's our question this morning was the puzzle of personal identity. What's the source of our identity? That's the Atman. What's the personal part? The personal part is the proximity and the intimacy of the body, the mind, and the soul, that is the intelligence, the gross, subtle, and causal aspects, the proximity of that intelligence is what gives us a sense of a personal self. So in Vedanta, we're considered to be an impersonal, personal being. And the principle of identity is not to be found in the body, in the continuity of the body, or in the continuity of the mind, the thoughts, the memories, the whole life, your life, constructing a philosophy of life, whatever those continuous projects are. That's not the source of our identity, is not constructed from those things. Our identity is not constructed from anything that we experience. Our identity just is ourself. It is our true nature. So let me give you two analogies that are helpful to us to understand the relationship between the absolute, universal, impersonal self and the personal, individual self. Two analogies are helpful to us in Vedanta. One is that of just to visualize, you get up in the morning, you go out in your front lawn, there you see in the front lawn the morning dew. Oh, there are many thousands of little dewdrops on the front grass. In each dewdrop you look, maybe the sun's rising in the morning, you look in each dewdrop, you see a little tiny sun reflecting. So we have the original sun, and then we have thousands and millions of reflected suns. There's reflected consciousnesses. In each one of those reflections, we can, in our conceptual imagination, we can imagine that little sun were to take on a life of its own. And we're to identify with the little drop of water, and to think of itself as a mind and as a body and as being located in a particular place and as having an identity, and would think of himself, I am. It would be a little I am. It's a reflected self. There's only one sun, but there are many reflected suns. And the truth of the I am remains. So maybe there's one image we can think of ourselves, a reflected self. Second analogy given to us by Vedanta is visualize a vast open plain, like you're out in the middle of Kansas or something. There's no houses, there's no trees or hills or anything. It's just flat land. And right in the middle of that flat land, you're going to build a house. And there's a house suddenly appears out in the middle. And well, now suddenly, out of nowhere, there's an outside and there's an inside. As we may approach the house, we look at the walls outside. That's like the body of our body. We can see it's a body. We go inside. It's kind of like the interior of our body. We know our mind. Maybe the pictures on the walls, the furniture inside. As we like our mind. And the space inside the house is kind of like our soul. That is, it's the invisible part of ourself. It's our I amness. It's the center of our being, our identity. And we feel as if we're inside the house and we're looking out the windows to the world outside. And the teaching for Vedanta is that in your true nature, the analogy being the analogy between what's the relationship between the universal spirit, that is, we could call it the spirit, the self, synonym for the self, whether it's our personal self or impersonal self, is the word the spirit. There's a universal spirit, like space, like universal space. And then there's personal space, the same interior, localized space. Your parking space. So, but it's the space inside is the same, a difference between, it's only the apparent limitations of the walls, the relative comparison with the walls, that we call it interior and limited. But in reality, it is a one with the universal space. And therefore in Vedanta, we speak of our identity as being, we speak of ourselves as being impersonal, personal beings. Speaking here from our own standpoint. And so, well, in Vedanta, our title here was The Puzzles. A lot of these puzzles in Vedanta just dissolve. These are puzzles that arise for physicalists. That means materialists who are going to assume that everything is matter. Obvious problems begin to arise to account for our everyday experience. And therefore these puzzles arise in the whole history of Western philosophy of mind. Vedanta, these puzzles don't really arise because it's beginning from a totally different place. It's beginning from the opposite place. In Western philosophy, it begins with matter. Eastern philosophy, it begins with the experience of the infinite pure consciousness. So one is deducing from the top down. The other is built from the bottom up. So, let me get a conclusion. What is our conclusion? Puzzle of personal identity. What is our personal self? That's our body. We are persons. What is a person? A person is somebody, is a body, a mind, and a soul, a unity. But that body, mind, and soul is part, cannot be understood fully. It's just like a person, maybe on stage, is in the foreground. We can see that person and describe him, but we can't fully explain that person unless we get the whole background, the whole scene, the whole what's going on. We need to have the background knowledge. The background knowledge is that of the Atman. That is behind the personal self, there's the impersonal self. That explains everything. That's the source. That's the sun. It explains all the reflections. That's the universal space that explains the individual space. That's the source of our being and of our consciousness and of our unity. So our goal in personal development is to fully actualize our person, that is our body, our mind, and our soul, to realize our infinite potential. Our spiritual goal is to realize the principle, the Atman, that is the principle of unity that gives us being, consciousness, our sense of value, and the unity, which is the goal of our life. So that's that. So today a little abstract philosophy. Any questions or do we have a few minutes?
Oh, yes, we do.
Yeah, okay, good.
Any questions for this one?
Give me some commentary or your observation or your pushback or your disagreement, or maybe not about something we said, but about anything. We're interested here in soul, God, and religion. Yeah.
Thank you, Swami.
Yeah. Just speak up here. I can't really see everybody in the back. Yeah.
So yeah, thank you. So the mind-body problem has been going on forever.
Yeah.
Obviously, so it's good scaffolding that you can explain. So in the context you explain the analogy of sun, the dews, the reflection of the sun, where lies the Brahman? You explain Atman, you explain Jivatman. Where is the Brahman?
Where is the Brahman?
Yeah.
Well, the Brahman is the sun. I'm using the word Atman. See, in Vedanta, Atman and Brahman, Atman is the same. Atman is looking from the inside, we call it the Atman. Looking from the inside out, we call it Atman. Looking from the outside in, we call it Brahman. So yeah, Brahman and Atman are the same. Is that your question?
Yeah, that's my question. So is it understanding that
These
non-dualists would see it that way? If dualism would look at Brahman differently, how would a dualist look at Brahman?
Well, now you're going to complicate matters. It's true. We have all the Vedanta is not content with one philosophy. Has different levels, different kinds of philosophy. So yeah, maybe you'd say, but not really. It's the same. Basically, it's the same. Essentially the same. That the sun in that analogy would be God, personal God, let's say, universal Bhagavan. That's the divine person. We are all parts of God. That is, we're like reflections. That's all. The only difference there is that in the Vedantic analogy, see, of the reflection, the pratibimba, it's called a reflection. And a reflection is unreal, see? That's the analogy. It's a Vedantic, it's a non-dualist analogy. Because the reflection in that analogy is unreal. The sun is real. The reflection is unreal. It's mithya. Whereas a dualism says that the reflection it's not a reflection. They don't use the word reflection. They'd say it's real. There's a part. Let's say a part of a whole. All right? Different philosophy. That's all. Part and whole. Reflection. Original. Yeah.
Swamiji?
Yes.
Following that, isn't it Ramanujan, the founder of Dishishtadvaitan, qualified non-dualism, who gave the analogy of the one sun reflecting on the 10 pitchers with water,
Yeah.
with the sun reflecting on it, and you break all of them, because they're just mere reflection. That is the individual soul. Right?
Well, this analogy's been used by everybody. These Indian analogies go all the way back to early Buddhist, before Buddhist period. So even Buddhist period, these same analogies are used. Sri Ramakrishna mentions this analogy. He says let's say there's 10 pots of water, and there's a sun. Now how many, let's say you break one pot. How many suns are there? Well, there's only nine left. 9, so you break that pot. Now there's 8, 7, 6, 5, 4. You break the last pot. Now how many suns are there? Now the tendency here, their intuition is to say, well, there's a one sun. And Sri Ramakrishna says, no, you can't say there's one sun. Because you can't see, all you can see is the reflections. So you can't say anything. That is neti. So he gave a kind of a Vedantic analysis of that. You can't really say that there is one sun. When you break all of the mirrors, the only way you can see yourself is with a mirror. Okay, so yeah.
Thank you.
Yes.
I just wanted to say that I appreciate the way that you put, you were talking about the big me being worshipped by the little me. In my life, I get glimpses where I can see that that all of my life is the play of Shiva, and that's kind of one way that I laugh at when I realize that it's just a play. It's all joy, and it's just Shiva playing in a way that is making me, little me, worship the big me. I just think it's peculiar, and I'm going to take that with me.
Yeah. Yes.
Swamiji, I really like the example that you gave of this vast space in where this house appears. I really love that example where, the house appears in this vast space, and then we say inside space and outside space, similar to, this body which appears somehow in this world, and inside consciousness and outside consciousness. We assume that there is a consciousness inside and outside, but there is really no demarcation, there is no. So I really love that example.
Yeah.
So thank you very much. It really opened up something.
Good.
It's a wonderful example. Thank you.
Good.